A tenant in Indiana is upset and thinks it's not fair after being evicted for supposedly complaining about repairs. But there's more to the story. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the story of this tenant who supposedly was evicted for complaining about repairs. But when I read the article, I noticed that there were certain things that were missing. Obviously, they didn't talk to the landlord. Obviously, we only hear one side of the story, and the story is coming from the tenant's perspective. So I like to kind of read between the lines when I see this sort of story, and I have to make some assumptions. So just keep in mind that these are my opinions of things based upon what I'm reading in this article. This isn't necessarily going to be true, right? But you cannot believe every single word that's coming out of a tenant's mouth. That is the first thing that we know as landlords. A lot of them, they will say things that are just straight lies in order to make their landlords look bad, and they do that for their own greedy purposes, right? So yeah, this landlord, I feel like somebody needs to step up and represent this landlord, because simply put, right, all of us, we get painted in this negative image just because we're the ones who collect the rent, okay? And they don't think it's fair that they have to pay rent. Oh well, that's too bad. That's too bad. And from the reading of the article, it sounds like the landlord was doing the right thing, making the repairs that were necessary, and the tenant still was whining and complaining and causing trouble, and that is the real reason they were evicted. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Have you ever had a tenant who just complained nonstop, just was constantly calling you, emailing you? Nothing you did was right. Even when you made repairs, they were still upset, okay? I have. Okay, oddly enough, yeah, I'm sure that any landlord who's been in the business long enough has had these problem tenants before. And fortunately, in certain places, it's easy to get rid of these tenants. And in this article, I believe it's taking place in South Bend, Indiana area, right? Indiana is one of those places where, hey, landlords still have property rights. We can still remove tenants from our properties who are causing trouble. And that's exactly what this landlord did. So anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from abc57.com, and it says, tenant alleging she was evicted for notifying South Bend code enforcement. And like I said before, this is a tenant perspective article. Let's get into the article. Are you having problems finding a suitable apartment or home to rent due to bad credit or limited income? Many people often turn to rental management companies for help, but are these companies delivering on their promises? Erica Young used a rental management company from Granger to help find a home back in November of 2022. But what the mother of two wasn't expecting was the list of problems that came with it, prompting her to ask ABC 57 News for help. Flooding, raw sewage, and mold were all conditions that caused her home on Swigert Avenue in South Bend to be condemned. Young moved into the house on October 16, 2022, and immediately reported plumbing issues and clogged drains. So I bring this article up for a reason, right? Because I have an old home that had similar plumbing issues to the one that's being described here in this article. Okay, my home that's in Gretna, Nebraska, was built in the year 1900, right? And something happened. I don't know exactly what caused it, right? But basically, the sewer line that was down in the basement started to back up, and sewage began to leak, and the entire basement flooded. Okay, and so the tenant, obviously wasn't very happy about it, having a flooded basement underneath the home. As soon as I possibly could, I got the flood remediation people out there. I got the plumbing people to go out there and get the drain unclogged. Right, I believe it was a tree root that had gone into it, and so this was a costly repair. And it took me a while to find contractors who weren't just charging out the yin yang in order to get this thing repaired. Okay, so it wasn't an immediate fix. I didn't just, oh, well, you've got a problem, and then immediately everything was done. No, it took me weeks to get everything completed, right? And then afterwards, the mold issue came up. I had the exact same mold problem. And so in Nebraska, you don't have to have a specific mold remediation company go out there and fix stuff. So I stupidly, and I admit it, right? I should have called mold remediation people out there to do, right? But I put a different contractor in charge of it, and they didn't do the best job. Okay. And so what ended up happening was I paid that contractor, the mold issue was not resolved, and then I had to end up going back, calling a different mold remediation company, and they went out there, cleaned everything up, did the testing, proved that the mold was gone, and the problem was solved. But overall, the whole process, everything that I went through took me 2 months. Okay. It was not an immediate thing. Everything I went through took 2 months. So this tenant thinking that, hey, instantly everything is going to be repaired and everything's going to be right, well, that's just not going to happen. And so imagine here you are, you're this landlord over this tenant, right? And you've got these problems, and you're resolving them one at a time. And hey, now all the tenant is calling the city and saying, oh, you're not doing everything right, and you're getting your house condemned. I'm like, hey, I'm in the middle of making repairs. Okay, what do you want me to do here? I can't go any faster. I'm at the, going at the rate of how fast these contractors can work, how fast I think everything's getting done. So yeah, I understand where this landlord, is coming from. Okay. My son was screaming. He was like, Mom, the house, the back room's flooding. There is water coming up, water everywhere. Raw sewage began to back up into Young's house through a drain. She notified MBSR Rentals to fix the problem, but weeks went by with no resolution. Young says the lack of response led to mold. She requested a mold inspector multiple times. Then her son started having respiratory problems. So yeah, I feel for the tenant. Okay, I do feel for the tenant, but like I said, there are a multitude of issues, and there's reasons why it took them weeks in order to get things repaired. Okay, there's not some instant fix to this sort of problem. Now, I feel bad that hey, yeah, you're in the house and there is some mold in there, right? But if the landlord's making a good faith effort to get the things repaired as quickly as possible, there's nothing else that can be done unless you want to move out. Okay. I'm going to skip down a little bit in here and get down to the part that caught my mind or my attention, right? And it's the part about how she notified the health department, the city health department. So it says, and so I then reached out to the health department because I told them, I said, there's mold in my home. And once Young alerted the health department, code enforcement inspected the home and condemned it. Okay, so she got this landlord's property condemned. Now, obviously, right, the landlord is going to jump on it and get everything repaired as quickly as they can, and that's what it sounds like happened. Okay, it says after the carpeting was removed and new flooring was installed, the property passed inspection and Young was allowed to move back in. But she said one problem remained: the mold. Young says she emailed MBSR Rental several times complaining about the mold. She says those complaints led to the termination of her lease. I was told pretty much send a notice to vacate, a 30-day notice to vacate by May 10th of 2023, Young said. And that was just for me reaching out and stating, hey, there's been really bad communication. Like, I just need to know what's going on if the mold is going to be fixed. And ABC 57 visited MBSR's office to get some answers. Staff told ABC 57's Kevin Wormhold that Young was removed for being a troubled tenant. So we're missing something here, okay? We're missing something here because the city code enforcement came back and inspected the property, and the property was deemed to be passing inspection, okay? and the problems that existed before were fixed. Yet the tenant is still complaining about the mold. Okay, so the landlord fixed the mold problem. The city came back, the city code enforcement health department came back and inspected the property and said, hey, you're safe to move back in here, tenant. And the tenant is still whining and complaining. Like, no, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. This isn't fixed up to standards. It's like, well, the city says it is fixed to standards, okay? So why exactly is this tenant complaining? This tenant's just being a problem tenant, okay? They are complaining a lot. They are demanding things be fixed that have already been repaired. And they're causing trouble for this landlord, okay? And I don't blame the landlord for not wanting this person to be a tenant anymore. Now, I don't know the terms of this person's lease. I don't know what's included in the lease, but it sounds to me like, hey, they asked this tenant to leave, for violating some term or condition that was within the lease, and within the state law in Indiana, they were allowed to do so, and so they were removed. Okay. Now, all of the other stuff that is in this article is irrelevant. And I'm not going to continue with the article, okay? Because, they go into, oh, how unfair the tenant thinks it is, and etc., right? But simply put, right, if the landlord was following the law, which I'm assuming they were, right, and the landlord was making the repairs that were requested by the tenant, then the tenant has no ground to stand on, okay? So, just another tenant who is causing problem for landlords. And fortunately, in a place like Indiana, the landlord was able to remove them from the property and then get another tenant in there who is satisfied with the place.